question comes from Jamie. Jamie writes, my horse Possum and I have been barrel racing for a little under 3 years now. I absolutely love this horse and don't want to have to change my mount, but his consistency is hard to depend on. Some days we'll run 17 nines and other days we'll run 18 sixes. Some days when he runs, he'll be sluggish to the first barrel and he's sloppy and slow around the turns. My warm-up is always the same and his feeding is consistent. Do you know of any way to help me get him a little more energetic on these down days he has? Thanks for your question. Jamie, I'm glad to hear you've considered Possum's warm-up and his feed as a potential source of his issues. You mentioned that you're consistent in both of these areas, which is great because horses are a mirror. So if we lack consistency somewhere, then they will also. You might also consider taking Possum to the vet for a blood test to rule out a health problem and also ask your vet about the possibility of ulcers. In addition, I'll post a link to a previous article on how to properly balance your horse's diet. As we know, this can really make a big difference in how our horse feels and how much energy they have. Now, once you've ruled out health issues, it's time to take a look at this from another angle and ask, does Possum fully understand that he's expected to respond to you in the same way every time you ride him? If you allow him to be less responsive sometimes, for example, if there are days when he's sloppy and slow and you don't correct him, then he's just learning that it's acceptable to slack off whenever he feels like it. Now, some barrel racers would say your horse has an iron deficiency, curable only through spur therapy, but we're going to approach this from another angle. It is important that Possum be responsive to your cues, and I'll post a link to a previous Q&A on that subject as well. But in this case, we're going to use horse psychology to get Possum to want to go. So first off, I'd recommend you ride him outside in wide open spaces as often as possible. When you ride in an arena, focus more on long straight lines than circles. Especially limit the number of small repetitive circles you make. These never-ending circles shorten a horse and tend to make them want to stop. For a lazy horse, larger circles, long straight lines, and wide open spaces help free up or lengthen and motivate them mentally. So the more you can do this on a regular basis, the more go you'll notice Possum will have. My next suggestion is where it gets really fun and interesting. When a horse struggles with focusing and has too much go, it really helps to move their feet a lot in various directions, either on the ground or under saddle. It calms a nervous horse and helps them focus. Basically, when they have too much go, doing something physical helps them mentally. So with a horse like Possum, who's already laid back and sluggish, we must do the opposite. We must get to him mentally to liven him up physically. We want to get to his mind, to get to his feet. To do this, you want to get creative and think of ways, either on the ground or under saddle, that you can do new, interesting things with Possum that really get his wheels turning, and avoid doing things that are boring, mindless, and repetitive. Find what really engages him mentally, and you will be absolutely amazed at how this will naturally motivate him to move his feet. Follow me to the arena, and I'll show you my horse and I performing an exercise called Touch It. I send him to an object and ask him to either touch it with his nose or foot, and when he does, I reel him back to me to reward him. He has to think to figure out what I want. What we do on the ground affects what happens in the saddle, and what we do away from the barrel pattern affects what happens on the barrel pattern. If you're already familiar with how magical moving the feet of a horse that has too much go and not enough focus is, then you'll have a beginner understanding of how these mental exercises can breathe new life into a horse that lacks motivation. While we're here, I'll also demonstrate another exercise called cruising, where I ask my horse to travel at a certain gait and keep going until I ask otherwise. It's really surprising to see how many horses, even those who are thought to be advanced in their training, struggle with this. I don't worry about steering at all, but I only require that my horse take responsibility for maintaining gait, usually a trot or a lope. This can get a little wild, so make sure you're in a safe and closed space, and it never hurts to wear knee guards in case your horse gets too close to the fence. If your horse breaks down, then just fan your legs and arm and add life into your body until he goes again. Pester him like this every time he breaks gait, and eventually he maintains on his own. Once he's done this well, then give him a break as a reward. For horses like Possum that appreciate relaxation time, the best reward you can give them is a rest. Remember that being consistent doesn't necessarily mean riding the exact way every day, but it does mean that we sense what our horse needs every day and then adjust to fit the situation. So Jamie, remember that Possum must learn that it's his responsibility to put forth full effort every time you ride him, but it's your responsibility to make sure he knows that this is expected of him. The cruising exercise helps accomplish this, and engaging him mentally with exercises like Touch It are a very effective but lesser known way of creating natural desire in your horse. If you implement these exercises and continue to be very aware of your own consistency, I'm sure you'll discover a whole new side to Possum that you never even thought existed. Have fun!